Cluster missiles don't just blow things up. They break routines. They poison streets with uncertainty. And they quietly drain cash flow long after the sirens stop. That's the part most people miss, because it's not as cinematic as an interception video. A normal missile strike is horrifying, but it's usually a point of damage. One impact, one site, one repair plan. Cluster warheads are different. They're designed to spread. They turn one inbound into many hazards across a wider area. And that changes the economic story from rebuild this to how do we safely live here again. So in this video, I'm going to explain how cluster munitions can hit a city twice, once with the blast and then again with the aftermath. We'll talk about why these weapons are so disruptive in dense urban areas, why they can overload emergency response and cleanup, and how that translates into something most people don't connect to warfare at all: cash flow. And I'll give you the key takeaway right now so you know exactly what you're staying for. The real economic damage isn't only what gets destroyed, it's what gets delayed. Because delays are compounding. Delays freeze business. Delays freeze labor. Delays freeze supply. Delays freeze confidence. And in a modern city, confidence is a form of currency. Now, before we go further, I need to be clear about something. In active conflict, details move fast, claims get amplified, and numbers get weaponized for morale. But multiple credible reports in recent days have described cluster munition use in strikes hitting Israel's major population centers, and the specific complication these warheads create by scattering many submunitions over a wide area. You don't have to agree with anyone's politics to understand the mechanics. So let's talk mechanics. Here's the simplest way to understand the economic punch of cluster munitions. Think of it as a three-part attack: damage, delay, drain. Damage is the obvious part: the blast, the fires, the shattered windows, the broken infrastructure. Delay is the invisible part: the time it takes to reopen streets, to clear buildings, to confirm areas are safe, to restore services, to restart commerce. Drain is the compounding part: the financial bleeding that happens every hour a neighborhood can't operate normally. Lost revenue, emergency costs, overtime, insurance claims, canceled bookings, supply disruptions, missed contracts. Now I want you to picture a normal city morning. People commuting, kids going to school, delivery trucks running routes, cafes opening, construction crews arriving, office towers filling. Now picture what happens when a city absorbs multiple strikes in a short period. Even if the physical damage is limited in some spots, the city's nervous system changes. People hesitate. Employers delay reopening. Public transportation gets disrupted. Roads get blocked. Emergency services reroute. And then cluster munitions add one brutal twist. They turn damage into area uncertainty. Because with cluster submunitions, the question isn't just what got hit. The question becomes what might still be dangerous. And that might is where cash flow starts dying. Because businesses don't run on might. They run on predictable access, predictable safety, predictable staffing, predictable deliveries, predictable customer behavior. Cluster munitions attack predictability. Here's what makes them uniquely disruptive in cities. A cluster weapon disperses multiple bomblets over a wide footprint. Some detonate on impact. Some can fail to explode and remain hazardous until found and neutralized. That unexploded risk isn't just a humanitarian issue. It's an economic one, because it changes how fast you can recover. It slows the reopening of streets. It complicates repairs. It makes construction dangerous. It increases cleanup time. And it forces authorities to treat larger areas as potential hazard zones until they're cleared. So instead of repair the one building, it becomes search the whole neighborhood. That's delay, and delay is expensive. Now, this is where people underestimate the effect. They think the cost is just the bill for fixing what broke. But modern city economics are flow-based. A city survives on throughput: people moving, money moving, goods moving, services moving, confidence moving. When throughput drops, the city doesn't just lose money once. It loses money every day until flow returns. So what does cash flow destruction actually look like on the ground? It looks like thousands of small decisions that become one big financial outcome. A restaurant that closes for 3 days doesn't just lose 3 days of sales, it loses perishables, it loses staff hours, it loses weekend bookings, it loses catering contracts, it loses momentum. And momentum is everything in business. A store that reopens late doesn't just lose revenue, it loses customers to alternatives. And some of those customers don't come back. A factory that pauses production doesn't just pause. It misses shipping windows. It triggers penalties. It breaks supply timing for downstream businesses. A construction project delayed by safety clearance doesn't just delay one building. It delays payroll, subcontractors, materials, permits, and financing schedules that are timed to milestones. Now multiply that across a dense metro area where one strike can affect traffic patterns, power reliability, and emergency response priorities. That's how a weapon aimed at physical damage becomes a weapon that drains economic life. Now here's the part most people don't say out loud. Even if the physical destruction is less dramatic than some people expect, the psychological tax can be heavier, because cluster weapons are designed to create wide-area fear. They increase uncertainty about what's safe, and when people feel uncertain, they behave defensively. They stay home, they spend less, they avoid crowded places, they delay purchases, they cancel travel, they postpone investment, they hoard cash. And when millions of people do small defensive behaviors at the same time, cash flow across a city collapses without a single additional explosion. That's the second strike. The first strike hits buildings. The second strike hits behavior. Now let's talk about the cash flow chain reaction in a city like Tel Aviv or any dense urban center. First, you get immediate shutdown effects. Businesses close temporarily. Events are canceled. Transportation slows. Public services get redirected toward emergency response. Then you get labor disruption. Some employees can't commute. Some have childcare disruptions. Some are dealing with damaged homes. Some are mobilized into emergency roles. Then you get supply disruption. Deliveries get rerouted. Warehouses become inaccessible. Ports and airports operate under restrictions or reduced schedules during high-risk periods. Then you get financial shock. Insurance claims spike. Risk models update. Short-term credit becomes more cautious. Small businesses, who live month to month, feel it first. And then comes the part that doesn't trend on social media, but matters for national resilience: the cleanup economy. Clearing unexploded submunitions requires specialized teams, time, and risk management. Repairs can't simply begin until areas are secured. That extends the recovery timeline, and the recovery timeline determines how much money leaks out of the system. Now let's make this concrete with a simple example you can visualize. Imagine a dense neighborhood with offices, apartments, shops, and schools. A traditional strike damages one building and a few nearby storefronts. It's awful, but the city can cordon off one zone, repair that zone, and let the rest function. Now imagine a cluster warhead disperses bomblets across multiple blocks. Some explode, some don't. Authorities now have to treat multiple blocks as potential hazards. Streets close, sidewalks close. Public transport routes change. Parents avoid sending kids. Businesses lose foot traffic. Repair crews can't start until clearance. And even after clearance, people remain cautious because the story of unexploded bomblets lingers. That's a wider, longer shock. Now I want to address something that's going to show up in your comments. People will say, but cities are resilient. People adapt. Yes, cities are resilient. But resilience still has a price tag. Adaptation doesn't erase loss. It manages it. And the adaptation itself can be expensive. More security, more redundancy, more inspections, more overtime, more protective infrastructure. Those costs come from somewhere, either from government budgets, which affects broader spending, or from private businesses, which affects prices, hiring, and investment. So the cash flow destruction isn't just one bill. It's the long tail of higher operating costs in a risk environment. Now let's zoom out to the macro level for a second, because cash flow in a city doesn't exist in isolation. Urban economic activity connects to national confidence. National confidence connects to investment. Investment connects to currency, borrowing, and long-term growth. When repeated attacks increase perceived risk, you can see second-order effects that don't look like war, but feel like it financially. Companies delay expansion. Foreign investors demand higher returns. Tourism collapses or reroutes. Insurance premiums rise. Borrowing costs can climb. And the state faces higher security and recovery spending at the same time. That's the squeeze. Revenue down. Costs up. That's how cash flow gets destroyed. Now here's a hard line you can clip. War doesn't have to destroy a city to bankrupt its momentum. It just has to make normal life too uncertain to run. That's why cluster munitions are so economically nasty in urban areas. They're not just aiming at structures, they're aiming at the routines that make an economy breathe. Now, I want to give you a simple way to judge whether cluster attacks are creating a deeper economic problem beyond immediate damage. Watch three things. First, the reopening timeline. How quickly do neighborhoods return to normal operations? Not, people are brave. Real reopening. Schools, transport, business hours, construction, nightlife, events. Second, the cleanup load. Are authorities reporting widespread clearance operations for unexploded devices? Are there repeated warnings to avoid certain zones? Are repair timelines being pushed out? Third, the confidence indicators. Do you see cancellations, disrupted air travel, reduced commercial activity, or changes in consumer behavior? Because the real economic story is not one blast. It's whether activity returns quickly or stays suppressed. Now, I promised you engagement and retention, so here's the punchy takeaway you can hold on to. Cluster munitions don't just create damage, they create doubt. And doubt is expensive. Doubt makes people hesitate. Hesitation slows flow, and slowed flow is how cash dies. Now, there's another layer here that's uncomfortable, but it's real. Even if a defender intercepts many incoming missiles, cluster payloads complicate what success feels like on the ground. Because if submunitions disperse, you can still see multiple impacts across a wide area. And that creates the perception that defenses are failing, even when they are reducing the overall damage. Perception matters, because perception feeds fear. Fear feeds behavior. Behavior feeds economics. So, in a modern conflict, a weapon that widens fear can be strategically powerful even if it doesn't destroy major infrastructure. Now let's land this with one clean summary, because if you can't summarize, you don't really own the idea. Cluster missiles hit cities in a different way. They widen the hazard area, increase cleanup complexity, and slow recovery. That creates delays. Delays drain cash flow, and cash flow is the oxygen of city life. So the economic damage isn't just broken buildings. It's the compounding cost of interrupted routines, delayed repairs, disrupted commerce, and the psychological tax that keeps people cautious even after the all clear. Now, I want your take. Do you think the bigger strategic effect of cluster munitions in cities is the physical damage or the long tail of disruption and fear that keeps cash flow from recovering? Drop your answer in the comments. Educational content only, not advice. In breaking situations, verify claims through multiple credible sources before treating any single narrative as settled fact.